The summer sun beat down on the broken farmhouse in northern France. It was June 1944, just weeks after Allied forces had stormed the beaches of Normandy. The war was far from over. German forces still controlled much of France, and every day brought new battles. Private Tommy Reeves sat in the corner of what used to be someone's kitchen. Now it was just another military position with holes in the walls and no roof. Tommy was cleaning his rifle. But this was not an ordinary rifle. It was a boy's anti-tank rifle, a massive weapon that could punch through armor. The gun was almost as tall as a man and kicked like a mule when fired. Most soldiers hated using it. Tommy had volunteered for the job because nobody else wanted it. What made Tommy's rifle special was the scope attached to it. But this scope was not standard military issue. Tommy had built it himself from pieces he found in the ruins. He had taken lenses from a broken German binocular. He had used glass from a shattered camera. He held everything together with copper wire and strips of metal. It looked strange. It looked homemade. Because it was. What in God's name is that thing, Reeves? Sergeant McKinley stood in the doorway, staring at Tommy's rifle. The sergeant was a big man with a thick mustache. He ran the squad by the book. He did not like improvisation. Tommy looked up, but said nothing. He continued adjusting a small screw on the side of his scope. Other soldiers gathered around. Corporal Davies laughed first. "Is that a scope, or did you rob a junkyard?" The other men joined in the laughter. Someone called it a death wish. Another said it looked like something a child would make. Only Private Harris did not laugh. Harris was Tommy's friend, the only one who had seen Tommy work on the scope night after night. "Leave him alone," Harris said quietly, but nobody listened. Sergeant McKinley picked up the rifle and examined the scope closely. He shook his head. "This is not regulation, Reeves. This could get you killed. What if it breaks during a shot? What if the calibration is off?" "It won't break, Sergeant," Tommy said softly. His voice had the accent of Liverpool, a port city in England that had been bombed heavily by the Germans. "And the calibration is perfect." "Perfect," Davies snorted. "How would you know? You're not an engineer." "No," Tommy agreed. "I was a watchmaker's apprentice before the war." The men laughed again. What did making watches have to do with shooting tanks? But Tommy knew. He knew that precision was precision. Whether you were fitting tiny gears into a pocket watch or aligning lenses to see a target 1,000 yards away, the principles were the same. His master had taught him well. "Precision is not about fancy tools, lad," the old man used to say. "It is about understanding what you are working with." Tommy had understood his scope perfectly because he had built every part of it. He knew its strengths and its weaknesses. He knew exactly how much the crosshairs would shift in wind. He knew the tiny imperfection in the left lens that actually helped him judge distance better. Standard military scopes were good, but they were made for everyone. Tommy's scope was made for Tommy's eye, Tommy's breathing pattern, Tommy's trigger squeeze. But he did not say any of this to the laughing men. He simply continued his work. That evening, intelligence reports came through. German Panzer tanks were moving in the area. Panzers were the backbone of German armor. The Panzer IV was especially dangerous, with thick armor and a powerful gun. Intelligence said 3 or 4 tanks might try to push through within 48 hours. They would likely aim for the stone bridge 2 miles east. If the Germans took that bridge, they could flank the entire Allied position. Hundreds of men could be cut off and surrounded. Sergeant McKinley studied the maps. His squad was positioned to defend the approach to the bridge. But defending against tanks was difficult. They had no artillery support. The big guns were busy elsewhere. They had no tank destroyers. Those were all fighting near Cannes, where the British were pushing hard against German defenses. All they had was Tommy and his anti-tank rifle that McKinley called Tommy over to the map. "Reeves, I am assigning you to forward observation." He pointed to a spot on the map. "There is a barn here with a clear view of the valley. If the Panzers come, you will have the best angle." Tommy nodded. He had already studied the terrain. He had already planned which position he would take. "Can that scope of yours actually work at distance?" McKinley asked. His tone was not mocking now. It was serious. Men's lives would depend on the answer. "Yes, Sergeant," Tommy said. "It will work." McKinley studied Tommy's face for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "Get some rest. You move out before dawn." That night, the other soldiers made bets. Some bet Tommy would miss his first shot by a mile. Others bet he would not even see the tanks through his homemade scope. A few bet darker things, that Tommy would get himself killed trying to be a hero. Only Harris believed in him. "You can do this," Harris said, bringing Tommy extra ammunition. "I have seen you work. I know you can." Tommy smiled. "Thanks, mate." As the sun set, Tommy sat alone outside the farmhouse. He held his scope up to the fading light, making final adjustments. In the distance, he could see the stone bridge. He could see the valley approaches. He could see the tree line where the Germans would likely appear. He did not think about the men who mocked him. He did not think about the danger. He thought about his father, who had fought in the Great War, the war they used to call the war to end all wars. His father had been wrong about that, but his father had taught Tommy something important. One good shot can save a dozen lives, son. Remember that. Tommy remembered. Tomorrow, he would prove it. The scope felt perfect in his hands. Every piece he had carefully ground and fitted. Every wire he had precisely wrapped. It was not pretty, but it was his. And it would work that IT had to work. The morning came cold and gray. Tommy woke before the sun rose. He gathered his equipment in silence while the other men still slept. The boy's anti-tank rifle weighed 36 pounds. With ammunition and his gear, Tommy carried nearly 60 pounds. He did not complain. This was his job. Harris woke up and helped Tommy pack. "Be careful out there," Harris whispered. "The Germans have been active at night. Patrols everywhere." Tommy nodded. The German army was dangerous even in retreat. After the D-Day landings, Hitler had ordered his forces to hold every position. He would not allow retreat. This made the Germans desperate and unpredictable. They fought hard for every field, every village, every bridge. The barn was 2 miles away. Tommy moved slowly through the dark countryside. France had been occupied by Germany since 1940 for long years. The land showed the scars. Burned houses, broken fences, craters from artillery shells. Tommy passed a destroyed German half-track. Its metal twisted and blackened as he reached the barn just as the sun began to rise. The building had been hit by something, maybe a mortar. Half the roof was gone. But the remaining walls provided good cover, and more importantly, there was a clear view of the valley below. Tommy set up his position carefully. He placed the rifle on sandbags he had carried with him. He arranged his ammunition within easy reach. 6 magazines, 5 rounds each. 30 shots total. He would not need 30. If he needed more than 2 or 3 shots, he was already in trouble that he looked through his scope. The valley spread out before him, about 1,200 yards of open ground. The stone bridge crossed a small river at the far end. Beyond that was forest where the Germans were hiding. Tommy could not see them, but he knew they were there. You could always feel when the enemy was near. The air felt different. Heavy. Tommy checked his scope's adjustments. He used distant landmarks to verify his calibration. A dead tree at 800 yards. A knocked-out German truck at 1,000 yards. A church steeple in the far distance, maybe 1,500 yards. Everything lined up perfectly. His mind went back to the watchmaker's shop in Liverpool. Old Mr. Henderson had taught him more than just fixing watches. He had taught him patience. "A watchmaker cannot rush," Mr. Henderson used to say. "One tiny mistake and the whole mechanism fails." War is probably the same, lad. One tiny mistake. The old man had been right. Hours passed. The sun rose higher. Tommy ate some rations that tasted like cardboard. He drank water from his canteen. He waited. Waiting was part of war. Soldiers spent more time waiting than fighting. But the waiting was hard. Your mind played tricks. Every shadow looked like an enemy. Every sound could be danger. At mid-morning, Tommy heard engines. His heart jumped. He grabbed the rifle and looked through his scope. But it was not Germans. A convoy of Allied supply trucks rumbled past on a distant road. Tommy relaxed but stayed alert. The radio crackled. "Observation post. This is command. Report." It was Sergeant McKinley's voice. Tommy picked up the radio handset. "Nothing yet, Sergeant. Clear view. No movement. Keep watching Reeves. Intelligence says they are coming today." "Understood." Another hour passed. Then another. Tommy's shoulder ached from the hard ground. His eyes hurt from staring through the scope. He thought about his family back in Liverpool. His mother worked in a factory now, making parts for airplanes. His younger sister had joined the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. Everyone was part of the war effort. Everyone had their job. This was Tommy's job. Watching. Waiting. Being ready. The radio crackled again. "Reeves, this is McKinley. Other observation posts report nothing. Command is thinking about repositioning forces. Can you confirm your sector is clear?" Tommy scanned the valley again through his scope. Everything looked quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Sergeant, He stopped. Something had caught his eye. Near the tree line, maybe 1,300 yards away. The ground looked different. He adjusted his scope and looked closer. Tank tracks. Fresh tank tracks in the mud. And the mud was still wet, still glistening in the afternoon sun. Sergeant, Tommy said into the radio. I have fresh tank tracks in the mud. They are recent. Very recent. Are you certain? Yes, Sergeant. Something heavy came through here within the last hour. There was silence on the radio. Then McKinley's voice came back, tense. Stay alert. Report any movement immediately. Tommy set down the radio and returned to his scope. His hands were sweaty now. He wiped them on his trousers. Then he placed them back on the rifle, gentle but firm. Like holding a delicate watch mechanism. Gentle but firm. The afternoon sun was starting to lower. Long shadows stretched across the valley. Tommy's eyes ached. He blinked to clear them, then looked back through his scope, and there it was, movement in the tree line. Something large pushing through the branches. Tommy's breath caught in his throat. A Panzer IV tank rolled out of the forest. The tank was a monster. Dark, gray metal covered in spare track links and equipment. Its long gun pointed forward like a spear. Tommy could see the German cross painted on the turret. Behind the first tank, a second Panzer appeared. Then a third. Tommy grabbed the radio. His voice was steady despite his racing heart. Command, this is observation post. I have visual on 3 Panzer IV tanks. Grid reference 472. They are moving toward the bridge. McKinley's response was immediate. Can you engage? Tommy watched the tanks through his scope. They were moving slowly, carefully. German infantry walked beside them, alert for danger. The lead tank was about 1,200 yards away now. At the edge of his effective range, but possible. Definitely possible. I can engage, Tommy said. Do you have a clear shot? Tommy tracked the lead tank. It was moving steadily toward the bridge. If it reached the bridge, the German advance would continue. If the Germans took the bridge, they would surround hundreds of Allied soldiers. The entire defensive line would collapse. I have a clear shot, Tommy confirmed. There was a pause. Tommy could imagine McKinley looking at the other officers, making the hard decision. Finally, the sergeant's voice came back. You are authorized to engage, Reeves. Disable that lead tank before it reaches the bridge. That is a direct order. Tommy took a deep breath. Understood, Sergeant. He set down the radio and positioned himself behind the rifle. His homemade scope, the one they had all mocked, now showed him everything he needed to see. The distance. The target. The moment .1 shot could save a dozen lives. His father had said that. Now Tommy would prove it true. Tommy pressed his eye against the scope. The Panzer IV filled his vision. The tank was still moving, maybe 5 miles per hour. Slow but steady. German tank commanders were trained to be cautious. They knew that Allied forces had anti-tank weapons. They knew every field could hide danger, but they did not know about Tommy. The distance was exactly 1,215 yards. Tommy had measured it using the landmarks he had memorized. The lead Panzer was heading straight for the bridge. Behind it, the other 2 tanks followed in a line. German infantry spread out on both sides, their rifles ready. Tommy began his calculations. Wind speed first. He watched the grass in the valley. It was bending slightly to the east. Maybe 5 miles per hour. Not strong, but enough to matter at this distance. Temperature was cool, maybe 60 degrees. That affected how the bullet would fly. Then there was the target itself. The Panzer IV had thick armor on the front, nearly 3 inches of steel. The boy's anti-tank rifle could not punch through that, not at this range. But tanks had weak points. Every tank had weak points. The side armor near the engine was thinner, maybe 1 inch. The engine compartment was vulnerable. A good hit there could disable the tank, set it on fire, or cause the ammunition inside to explode. Tommy had studied German tanks during training. The British Army had captured several Panzers and tested them, finding every weakness. Tommy had memorized those weaknesses. He knew exactly where to aim. The lead Panzer was 400 yards from the bridge now, still moving steadily. Tommy tracked it through his scope, his crosshairs following the target. The crosshairs were 2 thin wires he had positioned himself, using mathematics and trial runs. They were perfect for his eye point 300 yards from the bridge. Tommy controlled his breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow and steady. His heart rate slowed. This was like setting a mainspring in a watch. You had to be calm. You had to be precise. One mistake, and everything failed. On the radio, he could hear voices. Other soldiers were watching from different positions. They could not see the tanks clearly, but they knew Tommy had the shot. Some voices were hopeful. Some were doubtful. Someone said, "That homemade scope will never work at this range." Harris's voice cut through the chatter. "You have got this, Tommy." Tommy did not respond. He was beyond words now. There was only the target, the wind, the distance, and the shot point 200 yards from the bridge. The Panzer turned slightly, giving Tommy a better angle on its side armor. It was perfect timing, almost like fate. Tommy's crosshairs settled on the exact spot he needed. The engine compartment, right where the armor was weakest. He took a breath. Let half of it out. Held it. His finger touched the trigger. The trigger of the boy's rifle was heavy, maybe 8 pounds of pressure. You could not jerk it. You had to squeeze it smoothly, steadily, like tightening a screw. Too fast, and the shot would go wild. Too slow, and the target would move. Tommy squeezed. The rifle roared. The recoil was tremendous, slamming back into Tommy's shoulder like a kick from a horse. The barn filled with smoke and noise. Tommy's ears rang from the blast. For a moment, he could not see anything through the smoke. Then the smoke cleared. Tommy looked through his scope, his heart pounding. For 1 second, nothing happened. The Panzer kept rolling forward. Tommy's stomach dropped. Had he missed? Had the bullet gone wide? Then he saw it. A flash of light on the Panzer's side. Then smoke. Black smoke poured from the engine compartment. The tank lurched to the left, its damaged engine failing. More smoke billowed out. Tommy could see German crew members throwing open hatches, scrambling to escape before the ammunition cooked off. The Panzer stopped right at the entrance to the bridge. Smoke poured from it in thick clouds. Its engine was dead. The tank was disabled, blocking the bridge approach completely. The radio exploded with voices. Hit. Hit. Direct hit. The lead Panzer is disabled. It is blocking the bridge. Sergeant McKinley's voice was loud and clear. Confirmed hit. Reeves, that was incredible. Now get out of there. But Tommy was not listening to the radio anymore. He was watching the other 2 Panzers. They had stopped, confused by what had happened. The German infantry was scattering, looking for the shooter, trying to figure out where the shot had come from. Then the 2nd Panzer started moving again. It was trying to push the disabled tank out of the way. If it succeeded, the German advance would continue. All of Tommy's work would be for nothing. Tommy made a decision. He grabbed another magazine and reloaded. His shoulder ached from the first shot, but he ignored the pain. There was no time for pain. "Reeves, did you hear me? Fall back." McKinley's voice was urgent now. "You have done your job." Tommy picked up the radio. "Sergeant, the 2nd Panzer is trying to clear the bridge. If it succeeds, they will push through. Then let them. You cannot stay there. They know your position now." Even as McKinley spoke, Tommy saw German soldiers pointing toward his barn. Rifle shots cracked through the air. Bullets hit the barn walls, sending splinters flying. The Germans were 800 yards away, too far for accurate rifle fire, but they were advancing. "One more shot, Sergeant," Tommy said calmly. "Just one more. Tommy, get out of there." It was Harris now, his voice panicked. "Please." Tommy set down the radio. He positioned himself behind the rifle again. The 2nd Panzer was now next to the 1st, trying to push it aside with brute force. The range was slightly farther now, maybe 1,300 yards. The smoke from the 1st Panzer was drifting across Tommy's line of sight, making it harder to see. But Tommy had built his scope. He knew its quirks. He knew how to compensate. He adjusted his aim, tracking the 2nd Panzer through the gaps in the smoke. More bullets hit the barn. Closer now. The Germans were advancing faster, and they had called in mortar support. Tommy heard the distinctive thump of mortars firing in the distance. He had maybe 30 seconds before those shells landed on his position. The 2nd Panzer turned slightly, exposing its side. Tommy saw his chance. It would not come again. He took a breath. Let it halfway out. The crosshairs settled on the Panzer's track assembly. If he could break the track, the tank would be immobilized. Tommy squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared again. The recoil slammed into his already bruised shoulder. Through the scope, Tommy saw the bullet hit. The Panzer's left track shattered, links flying in all directions. The tank slewed sideways, its damaged track making it impossible to steer. It came to rest at an angle across the bridge approach. Now the 2nd obstacle point, 2 tanks disabled. The bridge was completely blocked. Tommy did not wait to celebrate. He grabbed his rifle and scope, abandoning everything else. The first mortar shell hit the far corner of the barn, exploding with a deafening blast. Tommy ran. Tommy burst out of the back of the barn just as another mortar shell hit the front. The explosion threw him forward. He hit the ground hard, his rifle clattering beside him. Dirt and debris rained down on his back. His ears rang so loudly he could not hear anything else that he forced himself to move. His training kicked in. Stay moving. A stationary target is a dead target. Tommy grabbed his rifle and scope and scrambled to his feet. His shoulder screamed in pain from the two massive recoil kicks, but pain meant he was alive. Behind him, the barn was being torn apart by mortar fire. The Germans were not taking chances. They were destroying the entire building. Tommy ran into the woods, branches whipping at his face. More explosions behind him, closer each time. The German mortar crews were walking their fire toward him, adjusting after each shot. Bullets snapped through the trees. The German infantry had closed the distance. They were maybe 400 yards away now, close enough for their rifles to be dangerous. Tommy heard shouting in German. They were coordinating, surrounding the area. They wanted him badly. He had just destroyed 2 of their tanks. They wanted revenge. Tommy's lungs burned. The rifle was heavy. His equipment pulled at him, but he kept running. The forest was thick here, which helped. The Germans could not see him clearly through the trees, but they could hear him crashing through the undergrowth. He needed to reach the rally point. Harris was supposed to meet him there with a jeep, but the rally point was still half a mile away. Half a mile of woods filled with angry Germans. A German soldier appeared to Tommy's left, maybe 50 yards away. The soldier raised his rifle. Tommy dove behind a tree just as the shot rang out. The bullet hit the tree trunk, spraying bark. Tommy did not have time to return fire. He just ran. More soldiers were coming. He could hear them moving through the forest, calling to each other. They were spreading out, trying to cut off his escape routes. Tommy changed direction, heading south instead of west. He had to confuse them, make them think he was going a different way. Another explosion. This one was ahead of him. The Germans had called in artillery now, not just mortars. They were dropping shells all around the woods, trying to kill him with sheer firepower. This was more attention than one soldier usually got. But Tommy was not just any soldier now. He had stopped their attack. He had humiliated them. They would not stop until they caught him. Tommy's boot caught on a root. He fell hard, rolling down a small slope. His rifle flew from his hands. He slid to a stop at the bottom of a drainage ditch. For a moment, he just lay there, gasping for air. Every part of him hurt. Then he heard engines. Close. Very close. Tommy looked up. Through the trees, he could see a road. And on that road was a German half-track, a transport vehicle with tracks in the back and wheels in the front. It was moving slowly, searching. German soldiers sat in the back, their eyes scanning the woods. Tommy pressed himself flat in the ditch. He could not move. If he moved, they would see him. The half-track was only 30 yards away. He could hear the soldiers talking, though he could not understand the words. His German was not good. The half-track stopped. Tommy's heart nearly stopped with it. Had they seen him? Were they coming for him? One of the soldiers pointed toward the woods, toward the area Tommy had just left. They were discussing something. Then the half-track started moving again, heading back toward the bridge. They were giving up the close search and returning to their main force. Tommy waited until the sound of the engine faded. Then he slowly, carefully, climbed out of the ditch. He found his rifle lying in some bushes. The scope had a new scratch on it, but it seemed intact. He checked the action. Everything still worked. He ran again, but more carefully now. His body was near its limit. He had been awake since before dawn. He had carried 60 pounds of equipment for miles. He had fired the brutal boy's rifle twice. He had been nearly blown up and shot at by dozens of soldiers. He was running on pure determination now. Finally, through the trees, he saw the rally point. It was a destroyed German bunker from an earlier battle. The concrete was cracked and blackened. And parked next to it was a jeep. Harris sat in the driver's seat, his rifle ready. When he saw Tommy emerge from the woods, his face broke into a huge grin. "Tommy, move your legs, you crazy bastard." Tommy stumbled the last few yards and threw himself into the jeep. He barely had time to sit before Harris gunned the engine. The jeep lurched forward, tires spinning in the dirt. Behind them, Tommy heard more shouts. The Germans had spotted the jeep. Rifle fire cracked through the air. A bullet pinged off the jeep's metal frame. Harris swerved wildly, keeping the vehicle moving in an unpredictable pattern. "Did you really hit two Panzers?" Harris shouted over the engine noise and gunfire. "Two Panzers," Tommy shouted back, clutching his rifle and scope tightly. With that homemade scope. With that homemade scope." Harris laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "They are going to write songs about you, mate." More bullets zipped past. One hit the Jeep's rear tire, but the tire was solid rubber and did not deflate. Harris kept driving, faster now. They were pulling away from the German pursuers. Then Tommy heard a new sound. A heavy engine. Not a half-track. Something bigger. The third Panzer emerged from the woods behind them, its turret turning to track the Jeep. "Tank!" Tommy screamed. Harris saw it in the mirror. "Hold on." The Panzer's gun fired. The shell screamed over the Jeep, missing by mere feet, and exploded in the field ahead of them. Dirt and smoke erupted skyward. Harris jerked the wheel, turning off the road and into a field. The Jeep bounced wildly over rough ground. Tommy held on with one hand, his rifle with the other. The Panzer tried to follow, but tanks were slower than Jeeps on rough terrain. Another shell fired. This one hit closer, the explosion nearly flipping the Jeep. Harris fought with the steering wheel, somehow keeping the vehicle upright and moving. Allied lines were ahead. Tommy could see British soldiers in their positions, waving them in. "Come on! Come on!" they shouted. The Panzer fired again. The shell hit behind the Jeep, so close that the blast wave pushed them forward. Then they crossed into Allied territory. British anti-tank guns opened fire on the Panzer. The German tank stopped, turned, and retreated back into the woods. Harris drove the Jeep straight to the command post and skidded to a halt. Both men sat there for a moment, breathing hard, unable to believe they had made it. Then the cheering started. Soldiers were running toward them, shouting and whooping. Sergeant McKinley was there, his face split by a rare smile. Tommy climbed out of the Jeep on shaky legs. He still held his rifle and his homemade scope. Harris came around and hugged him hard. "You insane, beautiful lunatic," Harris said. Tommy just nodded. He was too tired for words, but he had made it. And more importantly, he had done his job. The bridge was blocked. The German advance was stopped. The soldiers gathered around Tommy and Harris like they were heroes returning from an impossible mission. In a way, they were. Men clapped Tommy on the back. Someone handed him water. He drank it in huge gulps, not realizing how thirsty he had been. Sergeant McKinley pushed through the crowd. His face was serious, but his eyes showed something Tommy had never seen before. Respect. Real respect. Two Panzers disabled at over 1,200 yards, McKinley said slowly, looking at Tommy's rifle and the strange scope attached to it. With that, Tommy was too exhausted to say much. He just nodded. "It works, Sergeant." McKinley shook his head in amazement. "It works. God help me, it works." He looked at the other soldiers. "All of you who laughed at this man, you owe him an apology. That homemade scope just saved your lives." The men who had mocked Tommy now looked embarrassed. Corporal Davies stepped forward first. He was the one who had laughed the loudest yesterday. "Reeves, I judged the tool instead of the man using it. That was wrong. I am sorry." Tommy accepted the apology with a tired nod. He was not angry. He understood. The scope did look strange, but it worked because he had made it for himself, calibrated it for his eye, adjusted it for his style of shooting. "Come on," McKinley said. "Command wants to see you, and you need to see the map." Inside the command post, officers stood around a large table covered with maps. When Tommy entered, they all looked up. A major stepped forward. "Private Reeves." "Yes, sir. I want to shake your hand." The major gripped Tommy's hand firmly. "What you did today changed everything for this sector." The major pointed at the map. Tommy could see the stone bridge marked with a red circle. "Those two Panzers you disabled created a perfect roadblock. The Germans cannot advance through that bridge now without moving 30 tons of destroyed armor. That will take them days, maybe a week." Another officer joined in. "We counted the forces behind those tanks. At least 100 German infantry were preparing to cross that bridge. Behind them, supply trucks and possibly more armor. If they had broken through, they would have flanked our entire defensive line." The major tapped the map. "We estimate over 50 Allied soldiers would have been cut off and surrounded. Most would have been killed or captured. Instead, because you held that bridge, we have time. Reinforcements are arriving tonight. By tomorrow morning, This entire sector will be secure. Tommy listened, trying to process what they were saying. His 2 shots had done all of that. It seemed impossible, but the officers were serious. The maps did not lie. There is more, the major continued. Intelligence reports that the German commander is furious. He is demanding to know what weapon we used. He thinks it was a new type of anti-tank gun. His reports mention shots from impossible distance with impossible accuracy. Some of the officers chuckled at this. The Germans did not know it was one man with a homemade scope. Private Reeves, the major said formally, I am recommending you for commendation. Your actions today showed exceptional courage and skill. Tommy did not know what to say. I just did my job, sir. You did more than your job, the major replied. You did the impossible. That evening, back with his squad, the atmosphere had completely changed. The men who had laughed at Tommy now treated him with respect. They wanted to see the scope, to understand how it worked. Tommy explained the lenses, the calibration, the wire, the mathematics behind it all. It is not about having the fanciest equipment, Tommy said, carefully cleaning his rifle. It is about understanding your equipment completely. I built this scope, so I know everything about it. Every strength, every weakness. That knowledge makes all the difference. Harris sat next to him, still amazed by everything that had happened. You could have died today, mate. When those mortars started falling, when that Panzer chased us, I thought we were done for. But we were not, Tommy said simply. We made it. A few days later, a weapons officer arrived at their position. He was an engineer, sent to examine Tommy's scope. He studied it carefully, making notes, asking questions about how Tommy had built it. This is remarkable work, the officer said. The precision is extraordinary, especially considering you made this from salvaged parts. We would like to send this to our engineers for study. Perhaps we can learn something for future designs. Tommy shook his head politely. With respect, sir, I would prefer to keep it. I might need it again. The officer looked surprised, then smiled. Of course, Private. I understand perfectly. The officer did make a note in his report book. I am noting your name for the commendation file. The Army needs more soldiers who can adapt and innovate like you have. A week later, Tommy found himself back in the same farmhouse where this had all begun. He was cleaning his rifle again, making small adjustments to his scope. The crack in one lens from his escape had been repaired with a thin piece of glass from a shattered window. It actually improved the scope slightly. Tommy had tested it thoroughly. Sergeant McKinley entered the room. He no longer looked at Tommy with skepticism. Reeves, got another assignment for you. Forward observation position. About 3 miles east. Will there be Panzers? Tommy asked, but McKinley grinned. Intelligence thinks so. A whole column might be coming through. Tommy looked at his rifle and scope. He thought about the watchmaker's shop back in Liverpool. He thought about precision and patience. He thought about his father's words. One good shot can save a dozen lives. Then I am interested, Sergeant. McKinley nodded. Thought you might be. You move out at dawn. He turned to leave, then stopped. Reeves? That scope of yours. I am sorry I doubted it. I am sorry I doubted you. It is all right, Sergeant. The scope does look odd. Odd, maybe. But it works. That is what matters. After McKinley left, Tommy held his scope up to the evening light. The homemade creation that everyone had mocked. The brass fittings, the copper wire, the hand-ground lenses. It was not pretty. It was not standard issue. But it was his. Harris walked in and saw Tommy examining the scope. Still amazes me that thing actually works. Tommy smiled. It works because I understand it completely. Every part, every adjustment, every tiny detail. That is the secret. Not fancy equipment, but complete understanding. Think they will ever mass-produce scopes like yours? Tommy shook his head. No, this scope only works for me. Someone else would need to build their own, calibrate it for their own eye, their own style. That is the whole point. Outside, the sun was setting over the French countryside. Somewhere in the distance, the war continued. More battles, more soldiers, more impossible situations that needed solving. But Tommy had proven something important. He had proven that innovation mattered, that understanding your tools mattered, that one man with determination and skill could change the course of a battle. The other soldiers in the unit now understood this too. They had stopped mocking improvisation and started respecting it. Some had even started making their own modifications to their equipment, learning from Tommy's example. Tommy set his scope down gently and returned to cleaning his rifle. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More tanks, more danger, more impossible shots. But Tommy was ready. He had his rifle, his homemade scope, and his knowledge. That was all he needed. As night fell over the farmhouse, Tommy thought about all the soldiers throughout history who had improvised and adapted. War had always been about more than just equipment. It was about the people using that equipment, their creativity, their courage, their refusal to give up even when things seemed impossible. That a watchmaker from Liverpool had become an unlikely hero. Not because he had the best equipment, but because he understood that precision, patience, and innovation could overcome any obstacle, and tomorrow, he would prove it again.